Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Like and share this video, join the Rabyd Nation, a nation of people dedicated to normalizing atheism and deconversion by hitting the subscribe button, and if you want to support the channel in a more tangible way, hit the join button, and your membership options that lead to citizenship in the Rabyd Nation will be presented to you. Today I'm responding to Father Casey again. I've already responded to his second video in this series where he talks about the internal reasons that people are leaving the church. The funny part is when I originally looked at this video, the first one, it had a different title. It was called 5 Atheist Ideas Debunked, and which is I kept in my thumbnail because I created the thumbnail before he changed the title. Since then, his title has been changed to 5 Reasons People Are Becoming Atheists and How to Respond to Them. It's an interesting change. It's almost like he got feedback from his audience and had the realization that he hadn't actually debunked these ideas so much as he had talked about their problems and why Christians shouldn't follow them because of this. But let's let Father Casey lead off and tell us what we're going to be talking about today.
If you've been a Christian longer than a minute, you are probably painfully aware of the fact that faith in much of the Western world is in a downward trend. Over the past decade, study after study has revealed a sharp decline in religious affiliation, church attendance, and belief in God, while the number of people identifying as having no religion has grown rapidly. Why is this the case? Well, it's complicated. Not a mystery, but it's complicated. Some of the problem is definitely with Christians ourselves. If you're interested in an introspective look at what we're doing to drive people away, check out part 2 of this series here. Otherwise, what I'd like to look at in this video are the outside forces causing people to become atheists. Here are the 5 biggest threats to faith and what we can do to respond to each.
Once again, the nuns are simply people who state in response to the question, "What is your religious affiliation?" and they answer none. Now, these are in part atheists and also agnostics, and they're also the real possibility, though, that these people are spiritual people with no religious affiliation, as well as people who are just not religious. But you are right, it is growing, and there's a reason it's growing, and there's a reason why the numbers for things like Catholicism and Christianity in general are shrinking. But it's kind of an interesting thing to talk about, and so, yeah, we're going to continue on. But it is an interesting switch you do in your language. You go from talking about the nuns to immediately switching to atheism. You don't actually say atheism until the end of your intro. I think this is interesting because it focuses suddenly on one part of the nuns and tries to blame them for the declining church attendance in particular. But these people are not don't just become atheists when they leave the church. Agnosticism, spiritualism, or just plain I don't care anymore are all real possibilities. I think you actually narrows your analysis down too much, but we'll roll with it. Now, my interest is this. Atheism is simply, to me, the non-belief in God. And in my opinion, there are a lot of things theists like to attach to it that may or may not be a consequence of atheism. Often the connection is simply a way to attack atheism from something that is not inherently atheistic. But let's just dive into your 5 reasons.
Number 1, scientific materialism. Have you ever seen God? Felt a soul? Discovered any evidence for spiritual beings or forces? Chances are the answer is no, which has led many in the modern world to conclude that there is nothing to life but the physical world. For materialists, as they're called, we are nothing more than a collection of cells, a series of firing neurons giving the illusion of consciousness, but ultimately just bags of flesh. The material world is all there is. As science has progressed over the years, this has become more and more popular. Emotions can be reduced to chemical imbalances, miracles to natural phenomena. While there are still some things that science can't explain, proponents of this idea say that it's just a matter of time. Since all there is matter, we'll eventually be able to figure it all out. But what about one's conscience? What about a sense of right and wrong? If you take this idea to its logical conclusion, there is no free will because everything is already determined by our brain chemistry, which means that no choice is any better than any other because choice itself is an illusion. Hitler wasn't bad, it was just his brain chemistry. You're not responsible for anything you do, you're just a collection of complex cells. This is absurd. For people of faith, we must stress the individuality of the human person. Our thoughts, hopes, dreams, attractions, choices, everything that points to our uniqueness and our freedom to make decisions. When we do this, we show that we are more than just material, that there is something about us that can't be measured or predicted. We have a conscience. We have a soul. We have something that animates us beyond the physical world, drawing our attention to a reality beyond the physical world. Even though we can't prove it, we know that there is something spiritual about our existence.
You know what is interesting? That when I look up scientific materialism in Wikipedia, the definition is a term that is used by creationists and proponents of intelligent design to describe scientists who have a materialistic worldview. In other words, it's not a secular term. It's not even a term that many scientists would use about themselves. It's not even actually a term atheists always use at this point. It's a term that theists use to describe some atheists who do science. So it's actually, in my opinion, a dishonest definition in the first place. The thing about your video is you say that these people basically view consciousness as an illusion, but that's not true. You can't call anything illusionary under hard determinism, especially materialistic hard determinism. Everything that is real, including consciousness. It's just that consciousness is made up of something called something else. It's a simple activity of the brain. It's not an illusion, but a description of what consciousness is. So you're mischaracterizing the viewpoint in the first place that somehow consciousness is an illusion. That's not the case. The thing that bothers me is the connection you make between science and materialism. I don't know that all scientists are materialists in the hard sense of the word. Materialism is a philosophical framework that has many schools of thought, but the theist always seems to want to focus on hard materialism, which is what you do. Science is a way we study the world. Materialism is a possible consequence of what we discover using science. They don't necessarily go together. They might be connected in some way that one causes the other, but they're not connected indelibly to each other. And they certainly aren't necessarily connected to atheism. Sure, an atheist might head down this path, but it isn't a necessary one to be an atheist. All that is required to be an atheist is the rejection of all claims of theists due to a lack of evidence. I'm not sure that the logical conclusion is moral relativism. It might be better stated that morality is also determined as to what right and wrong is. Hitler is a bad person because a deterministic framework calls for many of us to declare him bad. He is evil because determinism leads us this way. I don't know much about materialism, but I'm sure most materialistic philosophers handle this objection to materialism. The Hitler thing is often employed, but I'm not sure if you are representing materialism in truth as they would state it, or that you're representing materialism as you perceive it, or whether you have represented materialism in all the different forms that it has. I am sure that the moral question is addressed at some point. It would have been nice if you have given a response to that instead of your own understanding of it. Just because we appear to have free will, choices, desires, dreams, etc., that doesn't imply that these things are not material. That's a leap you make and you don't justify. Also, materials, once again, doesn't say that consciousness is an illusion, but we are conscious, and we lose that moment that our brain seeks to function. There's no evidence of consciousness that can exist outside of a physical brain, and that is the materialist point. Then you just end up with an appeal to intuition, several assertions with no evidence, and highlights the difference between science and religion. Science backs itself up with data that is testable, provable, with predictive power, creates standards for falsifiability that can be met, more along the lines of truth and finding truth. Religion, by contrast, makes a lot of exaggerated claims and provides no evidence for those claims, often never giving any measure of falsification. So they make claims that can't be falsified and thus make themselves weaker. They're all emotional appeals. This makes the claim weaker than one that is given a test of falsifiability and passes the test.
Number 2, rationalism. If materialism is a world defined by science alone, rationalism is a world defined by math and logic alone. Because the senses, emotions, and conventions can all be flawed, they cannot be trusted. There is no truth that can surpass pure human reason. As with materialism, there is some truth to this. Who's going to argue against science? Who's going to argue against rationality? We don't want to be erratic beings guided solely by emotions or intuitions. What do the numbers say? What is logical? These are not bad questions to ask. And yet, we all know that what draws us to a beautiful sunset is not that it is rational. We fall in love and get married not because we've made calculations and can logically prove through some theorem that love is real. No. Life's greatest pleasures, what brings us the most meaning, come not from pure logic, but from beauty and love, from art, history, music, poetry, literature, and yes, faith. And so the way that we combat the rationalist is not with reasoned arguments or debate. It's not to play their game with their rules. We must break them out of their isolated worldview to encounter sacred spaces, places that provoke a sense of awe and wonder, that point to something beyond anything that can be explained. As Blaise Pascal once said, "The heart has its reasons, which reason knows nothing of. We know the truth not only by reason, but by the heart." While it's true that our emotions and intuition can't always be trusted, there is no reason to throw it away completely. Remember the feeling of seeing your first child. Let yourself be overwhelmed with falling in love. Look at the stars with immense wonder and don't try to analyze why. There's something that speaks to us beyond pure rationality, and it is the truth.
So you admit there's a strength of rationalism, but then start to talk about beauty and what draws us to it. Emotions that are positive like love and hate, art, music, etc. And these are things that are not rational. Is that true? There seems to be a false dichotomy that a lot of people employ at this point, that something is either rational or not, that things can't be a combination of both. For instance, I recently went to a music concert and the symphony played off of musical scores. There's a rationality to how the music is recorded, organized, put together, how the orchestra works together. There's rational, reasonable reasons why they do that. And then thus they produce music. Music is actually very much a rational thing, as much as it is an experience. Love has very rational benefits. The same is true for an appreciation of beauty. Beautiful things tend to give us a better emotional stability. They draw us to a better emotional high and state. They also lead to our survival, because it's interesting that how beautiful things are things that help our survival in general, and ugly things are things that don't. And it seems like that we kind of judge those things. Now, sure, there's exceptions to the rule, but that's adaptation to us. Also, history has a rational process in how it is done. It's not completely an irrational thing. I don't think these things are all or nothing in the way you present them. It's one of the great mistakes that somebody with a very narrow black and white thinking would make, that somehow all of these things are only one way and not another. The fact of the matter is love is both rational and, if you wanted to say it, emotional. But it doesn't mean that they can't have qualities of both. Now, the one thing you do mention is faith. That has a rational quality to itself, but it's purely pragmatic from an economic and social point of view. I mean, it's true that it has a utility, that if you live in a certain area with a certain religion, it might be best for you to adopt that religion to grease the wheels of social acceptance for yourself. But outside of that, does it have any way of conforming to reality? Does it have any predictive power? Does it have a test of falsifiability? And that's the real problem with faith. Faith has an inherent problem with it. You can have faith in anything. This is really there's no way to adjudicate which faith is better than another. One can have faith in a multitude of gods or belief systems. How do you determine which one is right or true? Rational thought becomes very important, as well as logic, when you're adjudicating between the different types of faith. So faith doesn't prove anything at all. Reason and rationality ultimately become used as an attempt to prove which faith is true. It's kind of ironic, really. Pascal was wrong about a lot of things, but we want to play the game by our own rules. You basically admitted that you don't have rational reasons for your faith. Everything you said proceeds from the false notion that bonding with a child, love, and a sense of wonder all lack rational foundations. They actually do have some rational foundations, and most things are not one way or another, but a combination of both. But you're also admitting rationality isn't exclusively atheist by the fact that you also employ it. Atheism can be the result of rational thinking and where rational thinking leads, but it's not the only result. And the fact that you also use rationality in utilitarian ways and openly admit so kind of indicates that it's not exclusively an atheist problem or an atheist idea. So maybe you want to drop the idea that this is one of those ideas that needs to be debunked.
Number 3. Secularism. No doubt you've heard the word secular used by religious people a lot, complaining about a secular world, secular music, secular culture. While often used to denote anything hostile towards religion, what we see in this trend, and what is so dangerous, is something that is solely of this world, pointing to this current age alone. An offshoot of materialism, secularism can see nothing beyond the reality in which we live. This world that we live in, this temporality, is all that exists. There is no heaven or hell, no alternate realms, nothing to hope for beyond this life. It is why the secularist is often so invested in politics and is constantly fighting off despair. If this is the only world, we must do everything to make this world perfect, everything to save ourselves. Unfortunately, this is a problem that has begun to slip even into Christianity. In certain forms of liberation theology on the left and Christian nationalism on the right, faithful people lose sight of heaven and invest themselves entirely in fixing this world. Politics becomes their religion, for what else is there? Of course, there is so much more than this world. What we experience in this life is but a foretaste of the life to come. While God's presence is certainly found in this world, and we must do what we can to be good stewards of His gifts, there is something that will inevitably unsettle us about the world, something that should make us feel like it is not our true home. No matter how hard we work, it will never be what we truly desire. This, right here, is where we must lead people. We must draw out people's dissatisfaction with the world, their deep desire for something more. Remind them of the futility of their work, that we will eventually die, and that this world will fade away with no memory of us. Deep down, we know that this is wrong. Deep down, there is a longing in each one of us for eternity.
I don't think a lengthy response is too required here, but all of a sudden you're injecting the idea of another world that we are looking forward to, that we have this innate desire, and that points us to another world. Well, how do you know that? A heaven to desire, a hell to shun, but no evidence is provided for either? I, on the other hand, can see this for what it is, manipulation. It's the inherent manipulation of the carrot and stick that's present in most religions. It is here that I can see you're designing for your video for believers and not for me, the atheist. You're playing on pre-indoctrinated beliefs because I want some evidence that hell exists or heaven exists or God exists, and you don't provide it. But there's also a mischaracterization of secularism in this little piece. I mean, what is the logical and rational conclusion if this is the only life we get, and it's a finite one, that there is no afterlife? Would it not be best to make this the best possible world we can make it? This is not about driving for perfection. This is because everybody can have as long a life as possible or can have what basically is considered to prosper them. Okay, but what prosperity is, what value life has, is a subjective idea, subjective to each person. So it's never going to be about perfection, but people getting the best value out of their life for themselves. Wouldn't working towards such a world be a noble purpose if this is the only world we get and the only life we get? I think it is. I'd rather deal with this than deal with the wishful thinking of thinking there's a heaven to gain with no evidence, that there's another world to gain with no evidence for it. I'd rather go on and look at the world that I have and try to make it better so that I can have a better life than engage in this wishful thinking that you seem to have. But it goes back to the point of characterization that you've made throughout the video, that life without faith or God has no purpose or meaning, that we are constantly fighting off despair. But that's not true. But more on that later.
Number 4, relativism. You do you. Whatever makes you happy. Well, that's just my truth. Mantras of a generation. Mantras of a world defined by relativism. Truth that is purely subjective. The opposite of rationalism, relativism posits that all truth is defined not by facts or logic, but by the feelings and experiences of each individual. Something may be true for one person, but not for another. For years, Pope Benedict XVI warned against the dangers of relativism, but even he could not have predicted how quickly it would pull at the very fabric of our society. In so much of our world today, facts have no worth. Logic is irrelevant. There appears to be nothing that we can agree on and no way to come to consensus. But surely no one can actually believe in relativism. There is a world with definitive forces and laws, with measurable experiences and matter, things that are one thing and not another. Ignorance may lead us to different conclusions, but there are right and wrong answers, things that are the way they are regardless of perspective. And if this is true, if there is only one thing that is objective, how did it come to be that way? Why is there something rather than nothing, and why is it intelligible at all? The person of faith, quite obviously, will point to God, objective being itself. There is something that created all that is and knows all that is. We may have our own individual perspectives and experiences of the created reality, but there is but one objective created reality because there is but one objective creator being.
I'm not sure relativism makes sense in the light of rationality or even materialism. You rightly point out that this is the opposite of rationalism and even materialism, so how the hell do we get here? It's funny how you want to point to rational reasons why relativism can't be true, which most rationalists would agree. Now, what I sense here is a veiled form of the moral argument where God becomes the force of objective morality rather than a subjective one. But this fails for me hard anymore. If God is the source of morality, then that morality is not objective. It's subjective to God's opinion on what morality should be. It's no longer an objective morality. So the notion that God exists, so objective morality exists, is a false one. If objective morality exists, it exists in and of itself without a God. Thus, if either premise of the moral argument is true, the other premise in it is false. Either you have God who is subjectively connected to a moral system, which makes that moral system subjective, so objective morality can't be true, or objective morality is true, but then there's no necessary connection between God and objective morality because the morality is objective. This is a common mistake that many theist people make when talking about morality being objective or not in relationship to God. They don't seem to realize that if you make it in relationship to God, it becomes subjective to God, and that means objective morality doesn't exist. And if it does exist, well, God isn't necessary for it. So there's that. There are a lot of trope claims here and statements, and the thing is, Casey doesn't go into what people hold as secular views would respond to these statements. Morality is ultimately a set of objective rules made out of subjective desires and value judgments. Rationality comes into play because you have to reason why you have a certain set of moral principles. You have to give evidence as why you think a law should be a good thing, if I'm paraphrasing Michael Schumer correctly. To me, relativism would not be the ultimate result of materialism because a material moral code would be deterministic. There would be no relativity to it or whim. It would be rationally based. It would imply a justification based on a benefit and value to a society. Interestingly enough, that is what evolution and social sciences tells us exactly what has happened.
And finally, number 5, nihilism. If there is one thing spreading through Gen Z like wildfire, it's this: hopelessness, apathy, distrust. We're worse off than the generation before us, and it's only going to get worse. There's nothing we can do. The nihilist gives in to the idea that there is no point to anything and that resistance is futile. Why try? And in one sense, you can probably see why. They grew up after 9/11. They've seen 2 economic crashes and a global pandemic. Their formative years have been during the most divisive time in American history. They were basically raised on Vine and TikTok and have been using it as a coping mechanism to deal with the bleakness of our world. But cope, they have not. Because we all know that social media can be as much an echo chamber as anything else, perpetuating what we want to hear and shielding us from alternative narratives. Like the fact that we are technically in the most peaceful time in human history. Children have never been safer from disease. Poverty is at an all-time low, literacy an all-time high. In so many ways, the world is filled with goodness and progress. As Christians, it can be easy to look at this world with frustration, but we can never give in to despair. This place may not be heaven, but Jesus himself says that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Everywhere we look, the presence of God is readily available for those who wish to see. Our lives may not make the difference we want them to make, but they do make a difference, and there is a purpose to our lives, even in the absurd parts. If we want to break people out of this nihilistic thinking, we must point them to the cross, the sign that God loves us so much that he would enter this world to die for us, to save us from darkness, to save us from sin, to save us from meaninglessness. It is from this heroic act of self-sacrifice that death itself is conquered, and we are shown that even the most despairing of lives can be redeemed. There is a reason for everything and hope for the future.
Some of the things you say are very true. Those being the part where you said this world is more peaceful than any time in history, that's actually objectively true. That childhood disease is lessened, also true. Poverty is low, that's true. Literacy is high, true. In fact, this is one of the better times in the world history to be alive, but the news would tell you differently because good news never sells, okay? And that's what you begin to realize about the media. And so I applaud you for pointing all that out. But now you're really pointing to Christianity as a source of hope and such. But I want to also point out to your list for a minute. What has led to a more peaceful world? Certainly not the cross of Jesus or the Christian religion. I mean, let's be honest, Catholicism is guilty of more evil than I care to think about. And they certainly don't promote the cause of peace in the name of anything. I remember hearing somebody objecting to the idea that religion causes wars, and then they go on to say, well, it only causes 7% of wars. Oh, so thank you for admitting that it causes wars. But it's not just the wars. It's the torture. It's the inquisitions. It's all the crap that religion brings to us that certainly hasn't done one damn thing for bringing about world peace. You know what has? A secular worldview that gets past the tribalism religion by its nature enforces. As for kids not from diseases, what caused that? Certainly not prayer and fasting. How about the scientific materialism, so-called, that you look down upon is really, we look at the reality of the human body and find ways to inoculate against disease and come up with treatments through biology and medicine, predictable, rational science. Poverty, yeah, that's more of that evil secularism where we try to make this better world by trade, cooperation between nations, etc. Literacy, secular education has largely been responsible for that with public schools. That allows for reading on a wide breadth of literature rather than reading to indoctrinate. I find it extremely ironic that you talk about all these things as leading to hope, and then talk about this world being a pretty good place mostly due to the very forces that you decry. I draw a lot of hope and purpose from rationality and secularism, so the characterization is a false one. In fact, you just kind of illustrated it for me. The message is clear. You don't want to become one of those atheists with those secular, rational, scientifically brained people, because that will lead you to being without hope and purpose. This is propaganda and has become pervasive among theists who talk about atheism and suppose these things connect to atheism. This is written to the flock and not to the atheist, but it highlights the current state of apologetics. That state is being not one so much interested in convincing people of the hope that is within them and to join us now. That's not what it's about anymore. It's about keeping people from leaving, and this is a good example of it. I don't know, off the cuff here, I found atheist characterization here the real problem, because throughout this video, Casey keeps pointing to no hope. You have no hope under this system. You now have no, real hope of an afterlife. So what? You have no real way of improving the world, and yet gives us some signs that the world is improving through these very forces. You have no hope, you have no purpose. It's a constant trope by a lot of apologists, and Father Casey has this all the way through. But why is he putting it in there is a really interesting thing to me, because he's not putting it in there because, there's a truth to it. He's putting it in there and he's not putting it in there because he's trying to reach me, the atheist, either. Why is he putting it in there? Well, he's putting it in there to look at his congregants and say, hey, you don't want to become part of this team because they don't have any hope, they don't have any purpose. Intuitively there's some sort of better sense. And that's the problem with his whole characterization. Because the fact of the matter is, one can have hope when you see actually results. I think I look at his example of childhood diseases. When we look at how many children die every day, and we note that through medicine and science and becoming more cooperative and becoming a more secular, open world, instead of being divided by our religions and divided by our petty differences, truly becoming more human and focusing as humans, that these problems slowly continue to diminish and diminish and diminish. And there's no way that religion in and of itself can make a claim to any of the goodness for that. Oh, there might be religious people that help with that, but they're also drawing on a secular worldview that I don't care that this person is another religion, I'm still going to help them. Well, that's secularism. And it's funny how, on the one hand, he wants to decry rationality, and then at the same time, he wants to utilize it at several points when it suits his convenience. Okay, I think I now know the reason why he changed his title. He suddenly realized he hadn't debunked atheism at all, and in fact, actually given ammunition to the secularists to say, yeah, thanks for giving us credit for all the stuff that we've actually accomplished, that we have diminished this where there's less violence and war in the world. We have created a world where kids have a better chance to survive. We have, watched poverty diminish. We have watched all these things that our social ills get smaller and smaller. And why? Due to cooperative secular actions where we work together, we get past the religious tribalism when we move forward together as a group of people known as the human race. But you can't have that with any religion. Religion is inherently tribalistic. It inherently, by its nature, reinforces tribalism. I'm the Roman Catholic tribe. I wear the nice robe. Don't you see it? My problem has always been with these viewpoints on atheism, and it's been a constant thing, and this is why I work towards the normalization of atheism. Quit mischaracterizing us, connecting us to things that we're not necessarily connected to, and deal with your claims that are false and bogus. It seems to be a real trend to attack the atheist, and I'm wondering why, if that's because they realize that they don't really have any proof that's convincing, that it really is all about faith to them. And faith is an empty shell. It doesn't provide good evidence. It can't be falsified. There's just no way to work with it. And so I find Father Casey a little bit, I don't know, disingenuous. I think there's a problem here. And I really wish that a lot of these apologists would realize that they're not being very effective. They're clearly not marketing these things for me. They're definitely marketing them for their flock, trying to convince them, don't go into atheism. That doesn't have any hope or purpose. Let me tell you something. I've created my own hope, my own purpose, and it's because I'm taking actions as a human being to create those things. Now, if it's a materialistic, deterministic worldview after all, then that's going to create my purpose, and that's going to create my hope, okay, whether I want it to or not. If it's a rational world, yeah, finding rational solutions that actually work, that are justified, yeah, that seems to be a pretty good thing. And I don't think relativism and nihilism actually makes sense under this kind of worldview of secularism and rationality and science. I don't think that those things actually play into any at all. As a scientist can say, I want to wipe out this disease. That's a noble purpose. And he has a purpose. It may be a temporary one, but it's still a good one. Okay, it's still a good purpose. Okay, I can look at the results we have made in poverty and literacy and all these things around the world, reducing childhood diseases, having less wars and fighting amongst ourselves as human beings. These are all the results of secular action, good economics, trade, things where we decide to cooperate. Well, that's a secular worldview. That's not a religious one. And so I find it, yes, again, extremely ironic, Mr. Casey, that you'll cite the results of our labors and then want to claim that there's something else beyond it that actually gives hope, and when it is the very things you're decrying that has actually given real hope in this world. It's really ironic. Well, I'd be interested in everybody else's opinion on this. I'm sure there's many other things I could have said about this video, but for the sake of time, kept a lot of those things out. But I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for stopping by, and I just want to give a shout out to my members. Thank you, every one of you, to my citizens, Rabyd citizens. You definitely support this channel in a way that is very much appreciated. You're also, if you want to join them, just hit that join button and your options will be presented. Super thanks and likes and all that stuff are well appreciated. Thank you very much. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around and then it's over. So you might want to take all your time, money, and opportunities to make this a better world, build up the relationships with the people you love and care for, and better yourself. And don't waste them on the trappings of religion and faith. That's a dead end. I speak from experience. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.